And we're off. Okay, so if you've never done a workshop with me before, I will introduce myself. So I'm Alice. I'm a career intuitive and mindset coach, also the founder of Woo Woo Company. It's a guide to all things woo, spiritual and holistic health to really help you figure out what you're meant to be doing in this life. Everything that I share with you is something that I have put into practice for myself and with my clients. And I know that it'll help you because it's worked for me and it's worked for other people. And if anything, it'll allow yourself to just be more introspective. So, how did I get into this space and why are we here today? So, I used to be in consumer marketing for a really long time, also a short stint in e-commerce. So, I had a corporate job for a pretty long time. And then something just like didn't really feel right. Everything looked good on paper, but it just didn't feel right. And back then I didn't realize it was my intuition telling me like, hey, you're meant for something different, you're meant for something more, and we're trying to communicate that with you through your feelings, through that unease and also a bit of anxiety and fear that crept up in that time in like my late 20s. I was like, I don't know how I feel about this. This is not the life that I imagined for myself. This is like not what I planned for myself. And so, when you have a specific path that you've set for yourself or someone has set for you, it's sometimes really tied to your identity. And that's why you have such a difficult time managing it and moving through it in terms of if you're going to change careers, if you're going to start a business, et cetera, et cetera. And so, for me, it was just such a time of turmoil. And it's only now that I have this business and I've done the inner work and I've helped clients through this as well that I realize that it's just you aligning to your truth and to your values even more. So if anybody has those feelings, anyone who's like in a corporate job right now and they're just kind of feeling that unease and feeling like, well, what would I do? Like if it wasn't this, like what would I do? And like, if I don't know what I'm going to do, then I'm just continue doing this, what I'm doing. But in fact, as you become more curious of like, oh, if I don't know, let me find some tools, some things that can help me figure it out. And that's kind of how I started this business. I used mindfulness, meditation, astrology, and journaling, and among many other things to really help me figure things out. Okay. So that's kind of like how I started my business. And now, I would love to know kind of like the intentions that you set for this session, what you're kind of like looking to learn. So if you want to put that into the chat, I'll read it in a little bit, but I definitely want to know. And the more you're able to ask questions, the more that you'll be able to share, the more that I'm able to kind of like tailor it and make sure that, my anecdotes, like my stories, like they really, really make sense for you. Okay. So please put anything you feel comfortable with in the chat. So when I started this business, I had a lot of fear and hesitation. So everybody who's joined this workshop today, they either have a business or they want to start a business, but fear is kind of like a big cloud that's really like muddling things up, and you're just like maybe taking some steps forward but then taking some steps back. And I think you're always going to experience fear no matter what, just like you're always going to experience like negative thoughts. It's just up to you every single day to clear it out. Just like you kind of tidy up your home every single day, you take the trash out, like maybe not every day, but every week or whatever cadence that you have, like you clean, like all those things, like you have to kind of clean your mind out as well. So we're always going to be dealing with these things. And so when I started this business, I had a big fear of being seen and being accepted. And a lot of my clients and a lot of what I see when people message me, like on Instagram or through like that hotline, that number that I have, they also experience this fear as well, fear of being seen. Now, what does that mean? And how does it kind of translate into your business? So when I started this specific business, my third business venture, a couple of years ago, I had such a fear of like what people would think. I was living in the DC area, and that's like where I grew up. And I remember so vividly the biggest fear that I had that seems like super silly now. I was just like, well, what are people gonna think? Like I used to like have this like really great career in like digital marketing. I was working abroad. I was traveling all over the world, like advising clients and stuff. And then all of a sudden, I just like quit and started this spiritual business in Washington, D.C. I'm like, what will people think? In my mind, I was so focused on like, what is that random person I knew from like 10 years ago going to think? Like, this is like kind of like a fear and anxiety that like makes no sense. And I was just like, what are people going to think? Like, they're going to think it's like so silly. But really, the fear is like really just mirroring an insecurity that I had, like being really scared to be seen, like who I am and sharing who I am. Because for so long, I was just kind of following the path set forward for me that really wasn't something that was authentic to myself. And that comes a lot from like what your parents say, like society, culturally, like being like the child of immigrants, like being first gen, like all of these different things. And I was like, wait, like I had such an identity crisis because my identity was so tied to my job. And when I didn't have it anymore, I was like, well, who am I? Is this going to be weird? Is whatever. And so through my business, it's actually been a very healing experience. And if you've been to workshops, if you like kind of follow me on Instagram, whatever, you know that I speak about how creating a business is the ultimate healing journey because it has allowed me to come home to myself and it has allowed me to really understand my identity, like really who I am, my values, what I want, what I care about, regardless of like, what external sources and forces will say. Okay. And so this was a fear that I had. I was like, oh, like, what are people going to think? So once I got over that fear, the fear became like, wait, like, I think I want to kind of share some of my own thoughts. Like I want to host my own workshops. I want to teach them like yoga class. I had this one class called like chakra healing yoga that was like going through specific chakras or like all of the chakras, like each yoga posture was to strengthen like the solar plexus, which is like your identity and confidence and courage or something else. And then I'd end with like a sound bath. And I remember like the first class that I did, I was just so nervous. I was just like so scared of being seen and to share something that I was like really, really excited about. And so I have moved through many iterations of fear. Okay. And this is kind of like the fear of being seen and how it kind of, it's not like a one and done. You're like, oh, like I'm not scared about this like this thing anymore. It's just going to go away. So I want to really emphasize that it's something that you work on every single day, every moment of the day. And this is not to discourage you, but to start helping you build a more healthy relationship around fear, that it's going to be there, but it's up to you, like how you will meet it and how you will address it. And most recently, last year, I had the fear of like, wait, I'm a psychic now, I'm an intuitive. Like I always tell people, and this is the truth, that, we are all intuitive. And then that means that we are all psychic, because once you develop your intuition enough, it becomes a psychic ability. And everyone has that ability. It's just kind of like where you start. Some people start off like, very kind of like seeing like people who have passed on, like they're very sensitive to like energies and all of that. And some people like me, it's taken me a little while to figure it out because I think I just was like closed off for a very long time. And last year, like I was studying to really open up my intuitive skills, and it came so quickly. And I was very surprised. And I think it was even just this year, I was like, you know what? I want a title that actually is a lot faster to share with people. If I'm like out to dinner, I'm like meeting like friends of friends, like something that isn't like my long spiel of like what my business is. And I was like, well, what are you? And I'm like, well, I'm a career intuitive and like mindset coach. And so I had to kind of get over like, what will people think? Because in the media entertainment, there's so much kind of like negativity or kind of like a silliness associated with spirituality. But like, don't be fooled, because the people who are like making fun of it literally do these things. Like so many people, like in the upper echelons of government, in business, like they meditate, they use crystals, they see psychics, they look at astrology, they journal a lot, they like everything, truly. But in the media and entertainment, they're just like, they kind of poke fun at it because it's easier to poke fun of it than being like, actually, this really works and everybody should just do the inner work. Because when you actually do the inner work, you develop your own voice, you develop your own confidence, and you start seeing stuff like in the media news. You're like, you know what, that doesn't make sense. I want to change it. And like, people don't want that. So this is a couple ways that it's kind of shown up in my business. And I think it's so helpful to hear from someone who has gone through it through a couple iterations and someone who is very honest about it. You know, you can always expect that from me. And in the beginning, it's like hiding behind your business. So I had this. So for those who follow me on Instagram and, you know, my business name is Woo Woo Company, like there was nothing about me 3 years ago when I started this business. I was like, it's not about me. It's about the business. It's about sharing the knowledge, when in fact, it's all about you. It's always about you. This is your life. Like, don't be the sidekick, be the main character. And so I was really hiding behind like this business name, this business entity. And now I don't anymore. And other things that I've seen for people who've come to me kind of like just like not knowing where to start, like in their entrepreneurial journey, a lot of people are really scared of sharing their idea. Like they have an idea, but they just can't share it. They're just scared. They're like, I don't know, like the website, Instagram, I don't know where to start. So I'm just not even going to start. And then there's a lot of stagnation. Well, there's stagnation because you're not moving forward by trying. If you try, you'll start getting the clarity. You could literally just launch 3 different businesses and then start moving like a little bit forward in each of them. And eventually you're going to figure out what you like and what you don't like. You just have to take that action. And then I see clients also not showing up for themselves and just doubting themselves of like, oh, I don't know, this is like already a saturated market, or I'm not the expert, or I don't know enough. You definitely know enough. You know enough. And if you don't know enough, you can figure it out. You'll sign up for like mentorship courses, like take classes, like whatever it is, like you can figure it out. We have the internet. Like back in the 90s when like the internet wasn't as like robust as it is today, like you literally looked at like Britannica encyclopedia to figure things out, or like ask people. And now like there's like you literally have the information like readily available and it's all free. Everything is like free. You can find it. You really can. So of course you are knowledgeable, and just through your own experiences, like that's enough, especially if you want to coach, especially if you want to get into like the spiritual space, the wellness space. And then the last thing that I'll share with you is a lot of times people will create really practical businesses and or offerings like, oh, like I worked in marketing for a really long time, so I'm just going to like create my own agency. Or, you know, like I've been working like, you know, in tech, so I'm just going to take some freelance things, or I'm going to start like a tech product, whatever, like kind of adjust that to kind of like your own experiences, like what feels comfortable for you, what makes sense. That's the worst type of business to create, because eventually you're going to want something more. When you hit those hurdles and those challenges, you're going to want to return back to the why of why you started your business. Like, why does it really light you up? And when something doesn't light you up, it can feel so heavy. So like you can think of a job that you didn't want to be in, how heavy that felt. Pretty bad. Like every day you drag yourself like awake, and then you go to work and you're like, oh, I don't want to be here, and everything else just kind of like all you can do is complain about it to your friends and your family. And when you can go on vacation, you're like, oh, and I have to go back to work. Like that constant like cycle, like not healthy, and you don't need it. Okay, so those are some examples of fear, and I just wanted to go into the chat. So tips to help the fear not prevent me from making moves. Very good. Understanding how mindset is passed down through generation and ways to release historic trauma. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, so those are some of the things that people joining live would like to kind of understand through this workshop. Yes, we will cover these things. This is kind of like the tip of the iceberg, if you will. This is your first time kind of like working through these things. So when I want to now talk a little bit more about fear. And if anyone has questions, just make sure to put them in the chat. And if you want to come off mute, you can do so as well. So fear is actually the same as excitement. Your body and your brain, like physically, biologically, can't tell the difference. It's just your mind making up, like overlaying like a story behind it. So it's a fine line, the difference between fear and excitement. And when I learned this, I was like, wait, that's so weird. And I did some like more research. I'm like, wait, this is actually true. So it's like when you're scared, you kind of feel a pit in your stomach, right? And then when you're really excited, you get butterflies. So it's just so similar. It just takes a slight shift for you to understand like, oh, how can I change this fear that's coming up into something that is exciting? And you also can get addicted to fear because It releases dopamine, and you can get addicted to it because you're like, oh, like it's because it's like the same in your body, like, and in your mind. It's just like, oh, like you can be addicted to fear whether you know it or not. That's why people love scary movies. Like, why else do they like scary movies? They like scary movies because, like, oh, they're addicted to kind of like getting that shock factor, or like, thriller like movies or whatnot. So you can kind of see these things like in news, in media. It's also just like clickbait of like, news. You're just like always kind of like the bad things. And you're just like, ooh, and you get addicted to like the negativity. You get addicted to the fear. So just knowing these things make a really big difference as you start to understand and develop a different relationship with fear. And when you're able to, every time a fear comes up, to bring awareness to it, and then ask yourself, like, how can this fear be used as a tool? So important. So every time now a fear comes up, I'm like, okay, so I'm scared of this. That's probably something that I need to address, because what we are scared of is really what we need to embrace and move towards. It's really kind of like that next level in kind of our personal growth, our spiritual growth. And to always view it from a point of like curiosity, of like, what is this telling me? What is my fear? What is my anxiety telling me? Okay. Those are just important things for you to kind of like keep in mind as we now move through some exercises. So are you ready? Get your notebooks out. If they're not already out, I'm sure you're taking notes already. So the first exercise is going to be identifying some fears. And the first question I have for you is, how did your parents view risk and deal with fear? So put that in the chat as well. How did your parents view risk and deal with fear? So I want you to write the answers down. And a lot of fear will come from your parents, will come from your community, will come from your family, because most of our subconscious and our belief systems are really solidified at a young age. So from like, you're born until like age 7 or 8. And then of course, like really up until 18 as well, but especially those first year, like early years of childhood. And it's like really kind of like, what environment were you raised in? Were your parents really stressed? Were they in a scarcity mindset? Like what was going through like their own world? And that really kind of colors like how they parented you as well. And what I realize is, for myself and for many people that I've spoken to, friends and clients, is that our parents are really not good at dealing with like traumatic experiences. They kind of are just like, okay, this happened, like moving on. We can't really dwell on it because we're focused on surviving. And you don't have time to like just like think about, why did this happen and how do I feel about it? Like your emotions almost become like a luxury. And so it's important for you to really investigate, like, what did they go through in their lifetime that they didn't address? And some of these things you can kind of like look up, like where your parents are from. You're like, oh, like they're from Nigeria, they're from like Pakistan, like they're from Indonesia. Like you can look historically, like what has happened during that time. And so if you're done with this first question, the second question is like, can you identify anything cultural that would influence this? Okay, I'm gonna put that into the chat. Can you identify anything cultural that that influenced this viewpoint? So for myself, I always knew that my parents and my grandparents, I'm ethnically Chinese, like went through a very, very difficult time, like during the Cultural Revolution in China, which was just a big communist movement and kind of going against like middle and upper class. And it was a very crazy time when like literally they would just put you up on stage, like if you're someone who's like an academic, like a professor, a scientist, a business person, and literally just yell at you for hours and make you say that you did all these bad things. Like it was really, really, really bad. And there would be like physical abuse as well. And I always wanted to like learn more, but it was like such a sore subject that I just would read books about it. So from that period of time, there was so much anxiety about being seen and sharing your opinion and being who you are. And when I actually kind of put two and two together, I was like, this year, for the first time, I was like, wait, I think this is actually kind of influencing like how I act and how I show up. This is why I've been kind of afraid to show up in my business, to be seen and to be authentically me, because in my lineage, it has never really been good to be myself, to be different, to share who I want. It's just kind of like, do what you need to do. You have your place, like do what you're being told. And it was such a game changer for me when I just realized that, put two and two together, that yes, this happened to them. And it was such a subtle shift in understanding, but such a powerful one, because I was like, wait, instead of me thinking like, oh, it's nothing to do with me, this is their experience. And then being like, but generational fear, like this is definitely past, and it's passed through ways of just like how your parents will react to things. That's why I asked, like, how do they view risk, how they deal with fear. Like my parents were very risk adverse. And I remember talking to my grandma one time when I was like living in Shanghai, where my family is from, where she still lives. And then I had a friend, he was a journalist, and he wanted to ask questions about like the older generation. I was like, hey grandma, like, they want to ask about like your experience and your life and all that. She's like, oh, okay. She was like a little hesitant, but then she agreed. And then a couple days later, she called me. She's like, I don't think it's a good idea. I'm not going to do this. And I was like, oh, why? Like, it's not even going to be published in China. It's like in Germany or something. I can't remember, but it wasn't China. She's like, I just don't feel comfortable. Like, that's like, I don't feel comfortable sharing my own experiences. Like even to this day, like it does actually still matter in China where I'm from. Like if you actually speak your mind about things that are like politically sensitive subjects, like they will find you, they will censor you. And if you're big, like if you make big enough waves, like they will find you, like physically find you and take you. And I know this is a lot in other countries as well. And so like even the way that they act is being passed down, but even just through conversation of like, oh, to get interviewed, oh, I don't know about like if you want to do that, like do something practical, be like a doctor, be a consultant, like be like a business person in marketing, but don't kind of like go off on your own. Like that's not like a good thing to do. At least that's like kind of like um the upbringing and the information that was shared with me. So if anybody wants to share in the chat, I would love to know kind of, your answers to these two questions, or any questions you have for me about this like first exercise, kind of just understanding like where some of the fear that you're currently experiencing like may come from, by going back first and looking at your childhood, how you were raised, how your parents viewed risk, how your parents like just like lived when you were really, really young. And for me, my parents like really had a scarcity mindset. So up until a couple of years ago, literally when I would go shopping, I'd only buy things that are on sale. I would always like look so meticulously, like, oh, I don't know, like, and like compare like this shoe or that shoe, this dress or that dress. And I'm like, oh, I'm just going to buy things on sale. And then I realized like, wait, it's because my mom only bought things on sale. And then I was like, you know what? Fuck this. I went to Whole Foods and I bought whatever I wanted. I was like, I'm going to Whole Foods. I want to be that bitch that buys organic. I have not stopped buying organic food for years now. And like, but also giving myself the grace of like, you know what? Like, if I can't find something organic, it's fine. And sometimes it's like really exorbitant. I'm like, it's fine. Like, but that was something like my mom was always just like, organic is really expensive. We can't afford that. Meanwhile, she buys like a Louis Vuitton bag. And I'm like, okay, so likewise, risk averse, calculated risk, but my family had to leave Sri Lanka due to civil war and being Tamil. So coming here without the same luxuries and starting from scratch. Yeah, like it's almost like, so another fear that I think that's been like kind of like implanted in me is like my family did have a lot of wealth. They had a lot of wealth and it was taken by the communists. And so for anyone out there who has had like in their lineage, like in their timeline, like wealth, but it got taken away, it's almost like you can't leave your job. You can't create your business. You can't be successful because it's going to get taken away. You think it's going to get taken away. There's that fear that was like unaddressed of like, I did this. I created something so phenomenal, so cool, and it was taken from me. But you have to learn that the past like doesn't dictate your future. And it's hard because it does. So the way to get yourself out of it is to shift your mindset, to visualize like, what would I do if I wasn't afraid? What would I do if I knew I couldn't fail? And what if I knew that everything I did was pushing me forward, even if like it didn't get the results that I wanted? Like the first business that you start like doesn't work out, or like the first offer like you share, the first product you launch like doesn't get any sales. Like if you knew that those weren't points of failure, but actually crucial moments of growth, like what would you do and what would you create? So really just kind of like understanding like where it comes from and being like, oh, maybe that's why I'm afraid to start something, because what if it does become wildly successful and then it gets taken away? Then you can do it again. But also in America, it's different. It is different than coming from a different country. Like there is a bit more safety, there's a bit more stability, and you have to kind of just have it in your mind that it's going to be okay, and that like you would rather create something and see how far you can actually go than not and stay stagnant. Okay. So the second exercise I have for you is identifying your fears. Okay. So what are like 3 fears that you have? I want you to write them down. About your business. It could also be like related to yourself. I'm going to give you a couple minutes, put on some music again for you. Okay, so you're once we're done with that, I have another question. Like, where do these fears come from? Are they rooted in a personal experience that you've had? Or do you hear the voice of like your parents saying these things to you? Like, I always hear like my mom saying, like, don't start your own business. You like have to work so many hours. Like, it's not worth it. It's better to work for somebody else. Like, these are some things my mom has like really repeated to me like over time, and I like really hold on to. Oh, that's so funny. Someone said that's also what my parents say about starting like my own business. But it's just their own fears of like maybe they tried and they like failed. Because my parents had their own business, and for them, like they were like they had to. It wasn't like a choice for them. But it's ironic because actually on both sides of my family, we come from a long line of business people, like a really, really long line of starting like textile businesses, being in like banking, being in like raw materials like wood. Yeah, so it's like you're not the first person to be a business person in your lineage. No way. It's like part of your DNA, part of the way you think. It's passed down. Like your mindset is passed down. Those neural pathways like are passed down of like you feel like you have so many ideas, like, and you're always trying to try something new, start something. That's that's passed down 100%. Personality traits. So I think it's really interesting. So she said again, like, say my grandparents and aunts and uncles have been in the textile business, and my parents also have their own business. Like, to have more like open conversations with them of like, hey, like, why do you say this? And what would you rather be doing? Because maybe it's not about like it's not about having a business, it's about the specific business that they have now. So remember earlier in the conversation I said sometimes people create businesses because they think it's practical. Actually, your business is supposed to liberate you. It's not supposed to chain you down. But when you do something that you think you should and you do it under like starting your own thing, it can feel like very constricting. Just like if you went into a corporate job, like you're like, I hate this corporate job, but I feel like I have to do it. So they're probably just in the wrong industry, and they didn't give themselves enough time to process and enough time to really understand like what would I actually really want to do. They might probably want to do something more creative, like be an artist. And then she said, I always wonder why they would discourage me about it, starting my own business. My family has a background in running businesses. Yeah, I know, it's really ironic. And so I think it's nice to have like that conversation if you can, just be like, why do you have it? And I think I would say intuitively, like, it's because they didn't receive the emotional support that they needed, like through like their partners, through their community, of like just the mental emotional stress that a business can bring up. Because if you don't have like the tools to help you with your mental health when you start a business, it can put you in a really dark place. And if you don't train your brain when you start, even well before you start a business, and especially during your business, it's easy to get into those like negative spirals. It's easy to think like how you can fail rather than like how you can succeed. I mean, that's why I titled this like a mindset reset. And that's why I have that mindset reset program that's coming up to help aspiring and new entrepreneurs. Because if you're not training your brain, you're letting other people kind of telling you what to believe, like your friends, your family, like what you see on TV, like what you read in the news. It's an everyday thing you have to work on. Okay, so I think that you probably have finished like your fears. If you want to put them into the chat, put them into the chat, and also kind of like where they come from. And now this exercise is going to be really helpful in starting to shift your mindset. So I want you to rewrite your fears as exciting things. So one fear you might have is like, what if my business fails? I want you to rewrite it in a more exciting statement. It's like, but what if it actually succeeds? What if I learn more than I've ever learned, in my career thus far? What if it takes me to places that really light me up? Like, think about it in a more expansive way rather than a closed off way, which is like what fear can be, like very constricting. But let's move into a more abundant state, more expansive state of like, oh, like, what would it look like if I reframe this fear? And this written exercise is what you need to do every single time a fear comes up. Every single time. I know it may sound like a lot of work, but on the flip side, the only thing that you can do is kind of continue that spiral of fear. So you'd rather do something different so that you can move forward than kind of stay stuck in where you are. And it takes a little bit of work in the beginning, but eventually you're going to start like creating new neural pathways. You're going to start like reframing things, upgrading your mindset to view fear as a good thing. Yeah, just rewriting it does take like the weight off of your chest and off like your physical, emotional, spiritual body, because like you don't know how much like fear that you've just been holding on to. And then you write it, you're like, it's not going to be so bad. Now I know that every time like I'm scared to do something, that means it's like what my heart really wants, because it's something new, it's something so sacred to me, and kind of like part of that next stage of what I need to do, that I just have to like move in that direction. Eventually you start to realize like, oh, fear is a good thing. It's really teaching me things. It's showing me things that like kind of like a light, like, you know, on a dark path of like, okay, like you have to go in this direction. It's kind of scary, but you know, that's what you need to do. And words are really powerful. So not only the words that you write, but the words that you speak and like what you think, right? And so this is an exercise to help you. Sometimes it's like a lot harder, like in the mind to like reframe that thought. But at the very least, you can start changing it, like writing wise, like every morning, if there's some fears that come up, journal in your notebook of like, okay, I have this fear, kind of where does it come from? And also how when I like releasing it with some like breathing, just exhaling it out and then kind of rewriting it in a way that is much more productive and much more like growth mindset for you. And then you can start speaking it when people ask you like, oh, hey, like what's going on in your life? Like, what are some updates? Instead of being like, oh, I'm really scared to start this like business. I'm really scared to launch this. You can start saying like, I'm launching this like new program, new offering, new whatever, new product. I'm really excited. You can always add like, I'm a little nervous, but you're like, but you start to reframe. And then when you start to reframe verbally, you'll start to see like it also changed like in the mind. It's kind of like a chicken egg. Let's start in the mind first. Like it does start with like your spoken word. And then, you know, eventually over time, like it'll just be a lot better. Cause I found myself just kind of like, you know, when people would ask me like, oh, how's this? How is that? Like it was easy for me to get into the negative mind stuff like, oh, well, like this and that, it's not going well. Or I'm like trying to figure this out. And then I was like, you know what? I just don't like want to be in that headspace anymore. So I'm going to reframe it. I'm going to be like, oh yeah, like focus on the wins. And if it is something difficult, focus on like, oh, what you need to do next. Or like, oh, like I'm not getting like, let's say good signups for a workshop. And then you're like, you know, I'm working on a couple things that will help me kind of like figure out like what workshops will resonate most with people. And I'm setting the systems up and the kind of like the marketing plan so that every time I launch, it'll always be like X amount of people. That's an example. Okay. So let's see. Does anyone else kind of want to add like, you know, the ways that you're rewriting fear or some fears that you have? I know this is like a very tender subject. So that's why I was like, it's fine if you just want to be in the chat. You don't need to be on camera. Like the workshop I had like 2 weeks ago, like everyone's like, oh, like, you know, it was the corporate to entrepreneurial mindset one, like a little different. Like, yes, fear is in there, but this one's like really about fear. So I know so many people are just probably watching the replay and being like, oh, I didn't want to show up like live. I didn't know what to expect. I want to like be curled up in my bed or like on my couch and like listen and like do these exercises. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, in the beginning parts of your business, it can feel really scary. So I want to give some opportunities for people to ask some questions. I don't want to do more than this because it's a lot already, you know, on your nervous system to kind of like bring these things up that you've maybe even kind of like been like putting off, or you're kind of been dancing around, like thinking about these things. And so I encourage you like tonight, like in the coming like days and like the rest of the month to kind of revisit some of these questions that I've shared with you, and kind of doing some of these practices like a little bit more each day. Like you're not going to kind of like start doing them like every single moment, every time a fear comes up, but at least this is going to kind of give you some like just like insights into kind of like figuring out kind of like how to move forward. So like when you feel like fear is preventing you from moving forward, like journal about it. And then like it's taking action is always going to be better than not taking action, because when you take action, like the universe rewards creativity and money flows like with like creativity and creation. When you feel stuck and stagnant, things feel like really slow. When you're creating, you're excited, like you're really busy. You're like, oh, I don't care if someone didn't message you back, or like, I don't really like, I'm so busy, like in my lane, working on my projects and working on my business that it doesn't matter. It helps you just feel a bit more lighthearted and joyful. Someone said, reframing my fear as an opportunity to learn and grow personally and professionally. Yes, that's beautiful. Okay. Questions, comments, concerns. Also, you can always DM me on Instagram, email me, text me any questions you have as well if they kind of like come up for you. Because I know sometimes we talk through so many things in my workshops that you may not like have questions immediately, and it comes later once you kind of have the opportunity and the space to really just absorb the information and understand kind of like, what feels good, what doesn't feel good, what do I still have questions about, all of that. So know that you can always ask me questions later. And then I also wanted to spend just a couple minutes to share a bit more about the program that I'm starting next week called Mindset Reset. Now, it is for aspiring and new entrepreneurs. It's a program that I'm really excited about. We're going to be, working through things like the topic today. So if you really enjoyed this workshop and you're like, oh, I want more, like that's what the program is going to provide for you. I have this online program that you'll go through, all these workbooks, videos, meditations to support you, like, along the way, and kind of discovering like, what do you want to create? How to be more confident, how to develop your intuition so you can make better decisions and stop questioning yourself, like all the things that may come up as you start a business and you feel unsure, and to really upgrade your mindset so you can feel good about working on your business, growing it, ideating different things, and thinking in a more expansive way rather than like a scarcity way and kind of like, oh, I'm not sure, because really how you think and your energy dictates like how like the opportunities and the clients and the customers that come to you. And it's taken me like each year and each like month, I learn like a little bit more. I understand it a little bit more deeply. I am able to embody a little bit more. And I'm just like, yeah, if I feel weird, if I feel stressed, like I'm in traffic and I'm like rushing, or if I'm waiting in line and I'm feeling irritated, like that's when like emails don't come through. That's when like the people that I want to hear back from don't get back to me about like, questions that I have or whatever. Like that's when like there's a constriction. But when I'm at ease and when I feel like relaxed and when I feel like safe and supported, like lots of fun things come through. Like all of a sudden, like one day, like, I always like notice this. I'm not, when I'm doing something fun, if I'm spending time like with myself, going to a yoga class or journaling, like so many things will just come up for me. But it's about like maintaining that energy, and how do you get to that place where you're able to consistently show up for yourself and show up for your business, because it is so easy to get almost there and then not finish that last part. It's like you're so close and then you quit from starting, or you quit like, like launching like a service or a product, or you don't see the results you want. You're like, oh, then it must be like people don't like me. False, 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 false. In fact, like you get so many more no's than you realize, and you will encounter so many more challenges. But it's like, how do you frame these challenges, and how do you kind of bring more curiosity rather than like annoyance and frustration? Because so often, especially when you're a solopreneur and you're figuring things out on your own, it's like literally you and like multiple versions of yourself kind of like just talking. And it's just you talking with like your fear, talking with your anxiety. Very rarely will your cheerleader come up and be like, you can do this. Yeah, like it'll show up for a little bit, but sometimes it'll kind of like retreat into the background, because those stronger like anxious voices like really come up and become a lot louder. And so this program is going to help you just feel like more at ease and get the clarity that you're really searching for. And we start next week. It's 3 months. You get live workshops like Q&A, one-on-one sessions with me. There's also a VIP business option where you get more live workshops, an extra business workshop as well. You can get into this group chat. You can ask me questions whenever. And every single day you'll get messages. Yes, Amanda, I'm so excited to have you. Every day you'll get messages from me to kind of just pull you out of like a sticky energy situation, or allow you to feel more expansive and more abundant. That's that challenge I'm doing right now. That's like the Abundance Biz challenge that I have going on in that hotline. So if you want to join the next one, I will email you, but you can also just text me over here and just say hello, texting this number. But that's all I have for you today. I will send I will send an email out with all this information about the Mindset Reset program. If this is something that you're like, oh, I really need it, I'm really excited about it. If you have questions, you want to DM me over Instagram, I can send a voice note over, I can hop on the phone, all that good stuff. But I hope you enjoy this workshop, watch the replay, and I can't wait to connect with you guys again. Yes, you're so, so, so welcome. And I'm cheering you on in the business that you want to create and are currently creating. You got this. You can do this. I believe in you. All right. Have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful rest of the week. And I'll be chatting with you guys soon. Bye.